I'm super excited for this week's episode of the Silicon Valley podcast. My guest today, well, I've known him for years. He's a friend of the Intel alumni, James Cape, and that. And you've seen so many past episodes where we've interviewed such a spectacular group that laid the foundation of Silicon Valley. But before we even start, going to do this nice little disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and not financial or legal advice. Consult with a professional for your specific situations. And none of the views reflect those of Finalis or Finalis Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Okay, now with that, we can start this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. Dan, for our audience, before we dive into those very, very challenging, difficult questions that are going to make you sweat, tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you, Shawn. First, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. I've been involved in the tech industry since 1981, the same year the IBM PC came out. Started my career in Silicon Valley in public relations, working for a variety of clients that were startups in software and networking and silicon and systems, and evolved my career in the software industry, mostly in areas of operating systems and programming tools and computer graphics. And 1989, I was recruited by Intel in Oregon, which is where I am now, in Oregon, not at Intel. But I worked there for 25 years, doing a whole series of marketing roles. I was involved in Intel's entry into the local area networking market, as well as then later into the server and data center environments. And that became Intel's biggest business over the years. Also involved in mobile wireless computing at Intel and information security. Managed a big part of Intel's relationship with Microsoft for several years. After Intel, I worked for company that's now called Thermo Fisher Scientific, involved in the semiconductor equipment supplier market, saw Intel from a whole other angle, which was really fascinating. And then got into business as a freelancer, doing writing and consulting and branding for other companies. And started the Fusion Syndicate, and we are now developing solutions using generative AI platforms like Copilot to help deliver team productivity and organizational competitiveness.
Well, question right there with that, the adoption of AI. Now, we had just had an interview with Shawn from Microsoft, and for our audience, go to our archives, fantastic episode. And in that, we're talking about AI implementation in businesses. What are your thoughts with that? What are the thoughts with those first steps of just teaching someone, hey, here are prompts to use with ChatGPT? I mean, how does one even get started, and how do they see the return on that investment in the technology and that time to learn it?
Well, and first, I really enjoyed that interview that you did. I thought it was really really good. I think in terms of people's attitudes about generative AI and prompting and how to use it and what to expect, that is evolving, and it's something new. So there's always an adjustment. It reminds me of when the Google search engine first came out at the end of the 1990s, and people were trying to figure out, is there some way to enter a search so you get more effective results? And some people became, Google Fu, like Kung Fu. Remember, that was a term people used to use. So that kind of thing's sort of happening with generative AI, but in a much more multidimensional way, because a prompt is not a simple search keyword. It's really expressing your intention. What is it that you want to get back? And so what a lot of people seem to do is approach a generative AI platform, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or Claude or what have you, as if it was a search engine. And they'll type in a sentence or two or three, or maybe they'll get fancy and do a couple of paragraphs, and sometimes get pretty good results. And that's okay, but that's not the whole opportunity. And so what people are learning is there's a whole layer of, I think of it as an application layer on top of things like ChatGPT or Copilot, Gemini or Claude, where engineered prompts by people who understand the business process that is being enabled, uh, more than just automated, augmented, accelerated, engineered prompts that embody the structured best practices to get the job done well, not just quickly, but better. That's where the value is. And whether it's the end user creating those engineered prompts themselves, or whether it's third-party developers who make a business out of it, and it's kind of a build versus buy decision for the end user, right? And there's some optimum combination depending on your situation. So I don't think people are there yet in understanding fully that opportunity. We'll get there because that is the promise of this technology.
I'm curious when you mentioned either the end user created or engineered prompts, like what level of difference is it? Is it like a person playing t-ball and a person playing a Major League Baseball, or are we talking more like um, the person on the pickleball court that's played for 1 week versus 3 weeks? Like what are we talking about the difference and an engineered prompt? Explain that a little bit for us as well.
Sure. Well, we're talking about business, and so any business process, any business function has subject matter expertise associated with it and best practices associated with it. So any application software in any business should embody best practices and expertise from real subject matter experts in order to help end users accomplish the goal well. And so engineering prompts should, involves the combination of that expertise and the ability to effectively implement it in a way that the generative AI platform can do something with. So having that expertise, either yourself as the developer or going out and finding it, and then being able to apply that expertise in a way that works well with these platforms. Those are the two key elements that make for great prompt engineering, in my opinion. It's kind of content and process, right? The content of the best practices and structure for the business process that you're augmenting. That's the content. The process is how to articulate it in a way using natural language, English, in my case, uh, to the system in a way that works, that's effective. And different large language models and chatbots have different profiles. So different things work in ChatGPT than in Copilot, for example. So that's another area of learning. There's a learning curve associated with that professional developers often have traveled before end users have, for example.
That's interesting. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the biggest misconceptions you hear, or maybe what's happened or changes over the past 12 to 18 months in AI? I mean, this is everything's just moving at such a pace. So I'm wondering, what you've heard, and then, really, I'll dive a little bit deeper there, but just this past short amount of time in the overall history, but I guess a long time when it comes to this technology. What 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 have you heard?
That's really true. I mean, 12 to 18 months ago, I think the buzz was all about, does this mean the end of civilization? Or are we all going to die because of AI? I don't hear as much of that, although AI safety is really important, and I really don't mean to belittle or discount those conversations, but those aren't the big headlines that everyone's talking about right now. Instead, what people seem to be talking about now is the impact on jobs and whether AI is contributing to slowdown in hiring, especially at entry-level jobs, things like call center jobs and that sort of thing, that where you can see generative AI has particular early application and adoption. Um, and that's really important, especially for people who are losing their jobs. So again, I don't mean to belittle that, but it's a whole different conversation than is the world going to end, because of AI. And I think 12 to 18 months from now, I certainly hope and believe the conversation will continue to evolve as to uh, reskilling. What are the different kinds of skills required for people to have value, greater value, or to emphasize the greater value that people do have today with respect to this changing environment where AI is taking on certain types of tasks. And that's really important. You know, AI can't do everything. It's the combination of human beings and AI systems together that creates positive results in business value. And so discovering that optimum combination, and we can talk about that. I have a lot of ideas about that. I think that's what awaits us in the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, tell us about that optimum combination of the two. I'm really curious because, I mean, you did mention a little bit of that right there in your answer about not everyone's going to lose their job, but the skills in that moving forward. So, what are those skills? How does one start using AI, and what is that combination between the the employee and the AI agent? How does that look?
So I recently published an article on a Substack called When Everything Starts Talking Back. And in there, I identify 4 layers of work. Uh, and just to be cute, they all start with an S. So specification, synthesis, stewardship, and social context. So let's go through what I mean by those and where AI fits and where human beings fit best. So specification is all about deciding what matters and why it matters, and what are the trade-offs that are acceptable, and how do you know you've succeeded? So people have to do that, right? It's our intention. It's what do we want, and then we use systems to help us get that. So that has to be us. The next one is synthesis, and what that's all about is producing at least a good first draft, whether it's code or a plan or a contract or a marketing strategy or content deliverables, whatever. And that's what AI is really good at, right? Gathering all these different disparate elements of content and putting them together in a really good way and giving you lots of options and doing it really fast and really well. So that's synthesis. So if your job is all about, coding and compiling and running and then doing it again, you're going to be displaced because that's essentially synthesis. But if your job's about figuring out what to code in the first place, okay, maybe your role might be elevated because the judgment and the relationships that are necessary in order to figure all that stuff out, that's human, and people who are good at that are important. But continuing to the third of these 4 layers, stewardship is the testing and maintaining and governing and improving the thing that you made, especially as its environment changes. That's critically important, and AI can do pieces of that, but it still involves relationships and experience and empathy. So the human touch is still very important. It may be that over the next few years, AI takes on most of that. We'll see. But the final one, social context, is uniquely human because, like specification at the front end, social context at the back end is all about trust and norms and consent and accountability, the human relationships and judgment in the face of uncertainty. Just like specification involves judgment in the face of uncertainty. And that has to be human beings that are accountable for that, and uniquely able to do it. And if we look at the last big wave of innovation, I think social media, which leveraged cloud and mobile and all that, but social media was kind of the killer app for all that. One could argue that there was a failure in anticipating and managing adequately the social context. Without getting into all the details, I think we all know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, yeah, you can dive a little bit there.
So new technologies not only have an immediate impact, hopefully for the good and improving productivity and sustainable competitive advantage, and maybe some negative side effects in that they disrupt the way work was done, so people have to reskill and all that. Those are kind of local effects that are in the here and now over the next year and within our industry, within our market. but there's a larger social impact that every innovation has, whether it was the printing press, and our friend James Cape likes to talk about, the various wars that happened because of the printing press, and he's right about that. Any student of history will tell you that big innovations cause volatile impact on society, whether it's economic or lifestyle or all the different dimensions of life. And so social media has changed what it's like, to be alive in our society. Any of us who've been around since before 2010 know what that is. That people's attitudes and behavior are changing. There's a compressed time frame and impatience, sort of a partisanship. There's conflict because the incentives are to get people's attention, and what gets people's attention are things that rile them up. We have this fight or flight instinct, and it's commercially profitable to play to that. And so that's happening. And so there wasn't an adequate anticipation of that and how it would affect our politics and the amount of violence in our society and all that kind of stuff, right? The ability for state actors to manipulate, the perceptions of the citizenry of another country, all that kind of stuff, right? It wasn't adequately envisioned and prepared for. With AI, we have a chance to do better. And we have to, because AI is far more powerful than social media.
That's interesting that you'd say that AI is more powerful than social media. But let's steer away from that and move into the workplace right now. Can you walk us through the typical workflow that teams should be thinking about from research to validate and output when they're using this type of technology?
Sure. I think of everything as having content and process. And generative AI is particularly good at working with content. And when you think about working with content, there's kind of a research and development cycle that all of us in the Silicon Valley world, the technology world, are very familiar with. And research precedes development for obvious reasons. You need to find out what to do before you do it, and what the limits are and what the opportunities are. So whether you're developing code or technology, or whether you're developing a white paper as a marketing person, you do research and planning of what you can then develop, and then you develop it. And that development process involves ideation and then craftsmanship applied to the big idea that you came up with, kind of a top-down approach, right? And that craftsmanship that follows ideation is different depending on the use case that you're building for. Now, I'm a marketing person, so I'll give you examples from the marketing communications world. If I'm developing an ad campaign, I'm going to need a different set of tools, different set of practices than if I'm developing a PR campaign, or if I'm trying to launch a new product. That's different than if I'm announcing a major change in business strategy. So you want to have the right tool for the job. That a screwdriver does something different than a hammer, right? And the same thing with software tools. Word processors are different than spreadsheets, right? So generative AI can be the same way. If you have tools that help you develop particular types of marketing deliverables, that's the craftsman side of things. They're going to be tailored specifically to that. And once I have my initial draft, it's going to be reviewed by stakeholders, and there's going to be adds, moves, and changes that need to be the optimization that's going to need to happen. So there's other tools for that. So you have a whole cycle then of really 6 elements that we've just gone through: research and planning, ideation and development, validation, which is things like proofreading and fact checking, and optimization, tuning to really have maximum impact. And so those 6 steps, that's a workflow, a generic workflow that you can apply to not just marketing or software development, but any really content-oriented set of business processes and tasks.
I mean, you talked about so much there. Maybe it'd be best, do you have a story or an example that you could share of a before and after um, someone you've worked with a client after implementing some of this AI technology?
Sure. So one of our clients is a software company that has happy customers that are in the uh, public transit. They're public transit agencies in North America are their customers. And so the software company that has these happy customers wanted to create a case study. So the research phase meant, getting information from that happy customer, specific data, statistics before and after that would be proof points for the value of that software. And, then the development would be to take that and turn it into a case study that follows a certain format. And then the validation, proofreading and fact checking, and then the optimization, making sure it's in the right brand voice, right? That would be the process. And so, without giving you a commercial about which tools from my company helped in which, they had specific tools that they could use. So when they did an interview, just like what you and I are doing right now on Teams, and it's being captured and transcribed automatically, so there's a text transcript that's verbatim. They took that transcript and were able to use a tool to pull out the verbatim quotes that backed up specific quantifiable business values that were gained. And then they used another tool to take that raw content and weave it into a specific draft that's aimed at a particular audience in a particular format with a particular word length and a particular tone. That tool is a craftsmanship type tool, like I was talking about, that proactively guides the user to answer all those questions to be able to create the right kind of output. And then they used other tools to then do optimization to get it in the voice of the person they interviewed and so on. So that way they went through the before, during, and after, you might say, elements of that workflow, gathering the information, developing it into the deliverable, and then fine-tuning it to really be most effective with the audience.
Now, a question there because you kept saying tools. Now, are these tools these prompt engineered that was discussed before? Or are these AI agents? What's the difference between a engineered prompt and an AI agent? Just
engineered prompts and agents, there's a big overlap. There's a little bit of a difference, but let's get into that. So what the Fusion Syndicate does is we develop and market solutions for content productivity. And what those solutions are engineered prompts in the form of tools that together comprise suites of multiple tools aimed at particular workflows, whether it's for marketing communications or for education or for executive leadership or for sales management or a number of other areas that we have. And they follow that workflow we talked about, that before, during, and after kind of workflow. And so these engineered prompts then embody best practices around those different tasks and guide users in a conversational, interactive way so that the user is always in control. The user provides the insight to specify the work to be done and the oversight to review and make mid-course corrections to ensure that the deliverable, which the end user is accountable for after all, is what they want. And so the difference between engineered prompts and agents, these agents are able to work with other agents. So there's a discovery and collaboration ability that is implied when you use the word agents that is not necessarily implied when you talk about prompts. Prompts imply a standalone thing. Agents imply this ability to work with other agents. And the Microsoft environment in particular is really built around that idea. Copilot Studio in particular is built around the notion of agent flows. And so agents can not only work with other agents within a company's suite of agents, as our roadmap points to, but also can work with agents that they don't even know about. Thanks to things like RESTful APIs, for example, which are kind of standard across the web, you can build in, the ability to interact with other agents that didn't even exist when your agent was written. And anyway, I won't get into all the different technologies of it, but there's all kinds of interesting ways to play with that, and also with APIs, so that your agents can work with legacy software, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but existing enterprise applications like CRM and ERP and supply chain management and that sort of thing. And one of the companies we're working with is a vertical software company that not only sells software to transit agencies like I talked about earlier, but also other vertical markets. And they figured out a way to add generative AI capability to their existing product to open up a whole new dimension of not only user interface, but also functionality and capability to their existing software. So that's a whole other dimension that's enabled by this sort of API level connection that agents can have. So the whole idea of agents really opens up this notion ultimately of pervasive AI built into everything. And 5-10 years from now, I think everything's going to talk back to us. And we'll be able to have conversations with the chair we're sitting in and say, give me a massage or whatever. That's where I think agents are going to take that. That's where I think that's taking us.
Let's look at that a little bit more, just from the point of view of a possible entrepreneur founder. Right? It was mentioned earlier the power of some of the engineered prompts is having that experience to create them. The early stage founder may not have that experience, but another benefit is having that prompt do, or AI agent do the work of someone else, bring them into that workflow that was discussed, from idea to action. Where do we get the balance of that new founder, low on capital, looking to see, hey, I need to use these engineered prompts that I may not understand, or these AI agents that I may not know, but to put the ideal team and workflows around them. And I know everything's going to be situational. I know everything's case by case basis, but very general to help our audience. How should one go about that?
Well, the way to think about it is that I think the same way to think about application software generally. One of the best definitions of application software I ever heard is software that automates business processes. So if you accept that for the moment, as a founder of a startup, I'm not an expert on all the different business processes that my company needs to run smoothly. And so I get application software that helps me do things like CRM or financials or what have you, and I trust the goodness of the built-in best practices in those packages, and they kind of standardize the way my company does those processes. So generative AI-based solutions are complementary to current application software in that they fill a gap between the user's intention and the possibilities of what the system can offer. So let's take go-to-market as an example use case. If you're a startup founder and you've recently gotten funding and you've gotten your development to the point where maybe you have some early customers and early revenues coming in, but now's the time to really launch into the mainstream and crank it up to real production, you need a go-to-market plan and you need to execute that. And although there are application software solutions like CRM and marketing automation platforms and other things that are helpful, if you're just a team of a handful of people, um, there's a gap. There has been up until now a gap in solutions that would empower you. And so what you would have had to do in the past is turn to an agency, marketing agency, and pay them a whole lot of money to do everything from, research and planning and ideation and early content development and validation, you know, up to the point of you then reviewing it and then them putting it into production and implementing it for you. And the problem with that is it takes time, it costs money, and you don't have as much control over it as you would like. So if you can disintermediate the agencies, at least for the first 70 or 80% of that, maybe still use them for camera ready art and production, video production and media buys and all that kind of stuff. But as far as the actual uh, ideas and the messaging and the copy and the framework of it all, if you could do that yourself well and quickly by leveraging your own skills and talents with what AI can do, then you're not only going to get there faster and cheaper, but better. Advertising agencies used to say you can have it on time, on budget, with high quality, pick any two. Now you can pick all three yourself, doing it yourself. So that's what's important for, I think, for founders. I mean, we're experiencing that ourselves. We eat our own dog food and we're doing this.
Well, with that, where should a founder start? Just whatever the first process is, and then go, okay, here's a process. Let me create some prompts. Let me refine those. Let me improve those until they're part of the workflow, or should it be just let me find an AI solution? Where's the low-hanging fruit to begin implementing things in your thought process even? So it's not uh, 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 I will go out and discover this. It is okay. The next step in this process, we use this, and then the next step after that, we use this other thing.
Well, so I would begin by trying to isolate where can generative AI be helpful and where is it less so. Uh, so, things that are mission critical that have to do with finance and legal and healthcare and stuff like that, that's not the place to start with generative AI, in my opinion. But things like sales and marketing, as I said earlier, that have a lot more of that qualitative element, and they're a lot more about content development. That is. Also, if you're a software developer, that's probably the first place where generative AI really showed a lot of value is in software development as a colleague, not as a replacement for programmers. So anything that has to do with content, that's where generative AI can help. And then whether you want to get into prompt engineering yourself or whether you want to find off-the-shelf solutions that are prompt engineered with built-in expertise that you can trust, that depends on where your own expertise is. I've encountered in my career as a marketing professional many examples of C-level leaders who are really great C-level leaders but are not experts in marketing or strategic communications, and yet they're at a point where a go-to-market effort is really critically important to the success of their company. And that I have found over the years is a very common situation. So in that situation, I think using off-the-shelf solutions makes sense because the best practices that are packaged in those solutions add value. They fill a gap for those executives, and that's real important. If you don't have the expertise yourself, you need to look for it. So it's buy rather than build in that case. And that's just going to vary depending on what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Yeah. And since everything is so new, how does one go about knowing that prompt, engineered prompt, or that tool that they're using is giving them the results that they want, and it's just not an hallucination, especially if you don't have the background in the profession to really know.
That's an important point because generative AI is prone to hallucinating. It'll very confidently give you uh, facts and figures and data that might not be accurate sometimes. Doesn't do that all the time, but that that that's well known. And so there are two things that we can do about that. One is uh, in these engineered prompts that we build, whether you're an end user or a commercial developer like us, there are instructions you can include in your engineered prompts that help mitigate these things. And just like information security and cybersecurity, it's not 100% protection, but it's better than not doing it. The second thing is that as an end user during a chat session, as you're using engineered prompts that you've created or that someone else has created, you're interacting with the AI in a conversational way most of the time. It's usually not just a one-shot thing where you're just waiting for the result and you're done. And so in that process, you need to be watchful and realize that you are accountable for the results. And so human oversight is critical and must always be there. It's always collaboration. It's never delegation.
Now, not to get, put you on the spot or anything like that, I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts. Do you think that prompt engineering is a commodity, and where's the moat?
Well, no, I don't think it's a commodity. I think that there's a talent and a skill set associated with prompt engineering, just like any other kind of engineering. And there's creativity and there's innovation, and uh, that's where the value is. That's where the moats lie. As we look at uh, prompts that are engineered by different companies or different individuals, uh, some have business value and some don't. If we have customers that are telling us that they're now able to do things that it would have taken a team of twice as many people to do, and they're getting 30% better quality at the same time, that tells me there's business value um, to at least those prompts that they're using. So I think that's the way, just like with any other product or service, you look for happy users and testimonials and case studies, proof points like that. Uh, and there's a due diligence involved before investing either in teaching your own people how to do it or in using other people's prompts. If you're teaching your own people how to do it, there's a whole lot of training involved in governance and ethical applications of AI that really have to be considered as well. And by the way, this is a whole other dimension we can talk about with respect to enterprise compliance. There's a whole lot of regulations that larger organizations have to follow where, their top executives can go to jail or be fined heavily if they don't follow. So, things like SOC 2 and all that kind of thing. And so there's a whole set of issues that generative AI brings up, opportunities and challenges both, in order to ensure compliance with these rigorous regulations, whether it's information security, data privacy, reliability, and so on. This is actually one of the benefits of using cloud services like Azure from Microsoft with Microsoft Copilot, because developers like us have an opportunity to simply connect to those services and take care of all that. Mm-hmm. But it's a challenge if you're trying to do it yourself.
Okay, then another question on prompt engineers. Do you think in the future prompt engineers are going to be looked at more as engineers and scientists or more as artists?
It's both. It's just like software, just like programmers. Prompt engineering is programming using English in my case, or if you speak a different language, Spanish or Hindi or whatever your native language happens to be. But you're still applying logic. You're still using instructions. But the difference is that you're doing declarative rather than imperative, right? You're saying what your intention is, what you want, not how to go about it. You're not saying add this number to that number. You're saying, I want a plan that includes recommendations. You know what I mean? So it raises things one level of abstraction. So the real value in prompt engineering is critical thinking and systematic thinking and logic. The merger of critical thinking, systematic thinking, and logic is really where the value lies. And that's true for software programmers who are really good. I've worked with software engineers since 1981 in many different areas, from operating systems to compilers to programming tools to computer graphics to data center internals. And there's always the creative, big thinker, sort of polymath types that are maybe 5% of the people I've known that are in that world. And then there's the craftsmen who do the coding, compiling, and running and repeat. And the first group is going to thrive. That latter group is going to need to retrain and try to get into that first group. And that's true with all professions, not just programming. But prompt engineering is the same way. You can implement simple ideas that work with generative AI, and they can help get more value out of the results. But there's more complexity to it. You can, as a prompt engineer, continue to learn and explore more techniques that extract real value out of this type of system. And this is early days, so people are still discovering new things, and that'll continue for years to come, I think.
What's one of the things that has been the aha moment that you've discovered or a client's discovered? And then we'll start wrapping it up. There's two other questions I really got for you that I want us to cover.
Well, the biggest aha for me over the last 2.5 years is what I've been saying about orchestration. That generative AI allows us all to become orchestrators of work rather than doers of every task. And it's like if you've ever moved from individual contributor to manager professionally, it's like that. Your mindset has to change, not from being just task oriented on what's right in front of me now that's tactically urgent today, but thinking a little more strategically. If I do this, this, and this, then what's going to happen in all these other dimensions? And so that ability to take a step back and think critically and apply judgment, that's ironically, generative AI can make us all more human because judgment and relationships and empathy and experience, those are uniquely human traits, and that's what's missing in generative AI. So that's what we as end users and as developers and people working with AI need to bring to the party.
That's really interesting to think that AI is going to allow every employee to become a manager. If you think about it, it's fascinating. Everyone's going to have their own, their AI agents or their engineered prompts or whatever, but it's okay, they're the manager. These are the things below them. They get to have workhorses while thinking big picture later. So everyone's, it's very interesting to visualize and think that. So we still got a little bit of time. You did mention a little bit about your company, the Fusion Syndicate, and what you work on, but tell us a little bit more about the problems you solve. If you want to give us an example, and then we'll wrap things up with kind of, what are you so excited about in the coming 12 to 18 months or 24 months?
So what I saw initially that got me on this track was I had been working, as I told you earlier, as a freelancer for a while, and I saw how I could use ChatGPT to do proofreading for me, and then to help me even with the writing of complex technical white papers and things like that. And so I created engineered prompts using my 45 years experience doing this kind of work, to build them. And I learned a lot about prompt engineering in the process, and those initial 2 prompts became, now I think we have like 28 of them, and they're organized in suites for different workflows. And that's where this whole idea of you know, research and planning and ideation and development and validation and optimization came in, because that's what I was doing in my work as a freelancer. And so it was very practical for me to apply what I was doing right then and what I had learned how to do over decades to things I could use. And now we have customers and people paying us money for what we've created, and they're getting business value from it. And we're meeting new people who are going to be new customers. It's very exciting.
And then what are you looking forward to in the next, say, year or two?
Well, with our business, I'm looking for explosive growth. We have an opportunity because we have migrated, are in the process of migrating our tools from ChatGPT to Copilot on Azure, being able to use that environment, as I suggested earlier, to not only comply with enterprise requirements for information security and data privacy, but also connect with the many applications and services that are in that environment and take advantage of that agentic benefit ultimately of leveraging all of those other things. So it's a real blossoming that I look for in our own business, from that respect. And as far as in the industry, I think we've seen, this huge wave of adoption of hardware. Nvidia is poster child, their success. But that's the enabling infrastructure. The real value is in the applications and services, right? We learned that from the personal computer revolution, the internet revolution, the cloud revolution. Hardware is just a boat anchor without the software that makes it do something. So the real value is in the applications. And the application layer is what's on top of the platform, on top of Copilot and Azure and all the data centers and all that, right? It's the best practices, the business processes, the workflows that deliver business value and competitiveness. And so I see that as the thing that's happening, starting to happen now, and will really start to ramp up over the next year, is uh, companies and vendors and customers and channels that are involved in these solutions are going to really take off because the infrastructure enabling layer has now been laid.
And Dan, if anyone wants to find out more about you, Fusion Syndicate, what you're up to, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Check out our website, thefusionsyndicate.com. And we have a little orange button on the upper right where you can click to schedule some time to talk to us if you want to have a conversation.
Fantastic. All right. And when I'm not interviewing incredible people such as Dan, I'm an investment banker focused on mergers, acquisitions, growth capital, secondaries. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Shawn Flynn. And for our audience, check out the SiliconValleyPodcast.com for all our past episodes, where you can meet James Cape, who Dan and me were mentioning on today's episode, and all the other great people from the Intel Alumni Network and so many others here in Silicon Valley. And with that, Dan, I got to thank you for this incredible episode. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Shawn. I really enjoyed it.